Clean Heart Club podcast. I am so tickled to be on here with you today, and I'm going to be sharing with you 10 lessons that I learned on a recent trip that I took to England. So, welcome. I'm actually sitting in my office today. I have my whiteboard here that I use when I'm coaching my live coaching clients, and I won't be using it today, but it's here with me, and I am so tickled that you are joining me. We are on episode 10, and it seems appropriate that I would just take a moment to thank you so much for watching this. If you're watching the podcast or listening, if you are listening, I appreciate the feedback. It just warms my heart that you guys are joining me. So I'm so thankful for that. So today I want to share with you about a recent trip that I took. So a little background. My youngest sister, my baby sister, passed away. Let's see, it's been 9 years ago. And when Amy passed away, I will post a link to a blog post that I wrote about her. She passed away after a long battle with cystic fibrosis. She lived to be 50. She lived an amazing life, even though it had lots of challenges. And she and her husband, Robert, took many trips. She got out of her comfort zone so many times. And when she passed away, I was like, okay, Susan, we're all going to die. How do you want to look back and see that you lived your life? So we were in Florida, Brad and I, and just kind of healing and grieving and all the things that you do when someone you love passes away. And I was watching a video series, and part of that series was an interview with Laura McCollough. And Laura was telling about these trips that she leads to Bellagio, Italy for women, and they were called Art and Faith Creative Retreats. And I was just like, I want to go on this trip. Now, at that time, Brad and my husband didn't want to travel internationally. He had his own reasons and he didn't want to, but he was all on board with me doing it. So I asked my friend Debbie to go with me, and we took a beautiful, amazing trip to Bellagio, Italy on Lake Como. I will never forget it. It was just an amazing trip. I fell in love with Laura and learned that her trips are top notch. You're cared for. She makes all the big decisions and leaves you with still with some choices to make yourself. It was just so good. So I went with her to Italy, and then a couple summers after that, I went with her to Paris and Bruges, Belgium. That trip was also so good. And then she invited me to come and lead some holy yoga on another trip to Bellagio. And I, of course, was on board, so excited. And then COVID happened, and that trip was postponed. And I ended up using, transferring that trip to a trip that she has stateside, which is to Vermont in the fall. And I did that a couple of years ago. It was amazing too. I loved it. I was able to reconnect with two of the gals that went to Paris with me, and it was so good. And I honestly thought, okay, I've been where Laura goes. And then she announced that she was going to be leading a trip to England. And I love all things British. So I knew right away that I wanted to go. So I asked Brad, he said yes, and I signed up. So I just want to encourage you that traveling with Art and Faith Creative Retreats is always a good idea. You're going to have great travel buddies. Your accommodations are going to be top notch. Your food, your excursions, the art, and the faith component is just a wonderful combo. And I want to encourage you, if you are interested in any of those places, save up your money and make one of those trips happen. I will put links in the show notes so you can check all this out. So I just got back from 2 weeks in England, and I want to share with you some of the things that I learned. So the first one is that traveling with Laura is always a good idea. The second one is my favorite thing is always going to be the people that I travel with. Now, on this trip, there were 11 women from all over the United States. Each one had different life experiences. There was a range of ages. But one thing we had in common was that we were all believers and we all had an interest at some level in art. Now, some of these women are actual artists. I am not an artist, but I am someone who appreciates art and likes to play with her watercolor pencils. So we bonded immediately. If you've ever traveled with people outside of your comfort zone, I don't know what your experience has been, but mine has been amazing each time. It's like the Holy Spirit just binds us together. There's no competition. Everybody wants to get to know everybody. There's no cliques. It's instant acceptance. You accept the people you travel with, they accept you. Everyone drops their preconceived notions. It's just easier. It's easy to operate from your true self, and it's so freeing. So I want to encourage you not to be afraid to do that. I also want to give a shout out to my new friend Donna, who Laura hooked us up because I'm kind of a scaredy cat, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. And the thought of flying into Heathrow Airport by myself and not knowing where I was going to go made me very nervous. So Laura hooked me up with Donna, and Donna lives in Michigan. So I flew from Indy to Detroit. Donna and I met there, and we flew together then from Detroit to Heathrow. We made accommodations to be picked up by an Uber driver that Laura suggested. So he quickly came to the airport, picked us up, took us to our hotel. But just having Donna there with me took 99.9% of the stress of the whole thing away. So that was really good. And you can do that too. You can fly to an airport and meet someone else who's going on the trip that you are going on. I cannot say enough about the women who were on this trip. I loved each one of them. They all had a zest for life, the sweetest hearts, and it was just so fun to know that now I have another group of friends from all over the United States. I love it. Okay, another thing I learned was something I knew, but I know it even more deeply now, that this is all God's story. There was so much history in England, and it was just brought to my attention over and over and over and over again that this is God's story, and we just get to play our part in our moment of time. So from the beginning of creation through each of the periods of history, man wants to think that the story is about us and our accomplishments. We want to put ourselves in the center of the story, but God, it's all the story of how God is moving in the world that he created, about people seeking him and finding him and learning and growing and failing and succeeding as he moves his story forward. So as we heard about the development of England and these towns that I was in that had all this historical things, so many times, often, all the time, the church was the center of it. Now, has the story all been rainbows and sunshine? No, but It's God's story. So I just want to encourage myself and you that just like Esther in the Old Testament, she was created for such a time as this. And I feel like you were created for such a time as this, and I was created for such a time as this. So I want my eyes, open my eyes, Lord, so I can see what is my role to play as I join with what God is doing in his story. The fourth thing that I learned is that art is essential and artists are everywhere, even in you and me. I saw beautiful, famous paintings in beautiful places with beautiful people. I got to see impressionist paintings, including one by Monet in York, which was just so beautiful, so beautiful. It turns out that these impressionist painters really speak to my soul. And I am just so thankful that God has allowed me to see this amazing art in some of the most iconic museums in the world. Girls, if God can make that happen for me, a farm wife from the middle of Illinois, he can do it for you if you want to. So I learned that it was just verified that we are created by a creator to create. I'm so amazed that God puts people with beautiful voices, whether they're using the voice of the paintbrush, the voice of their fingers on a musical instrument. There's so many ways to create, and God puts creative people everywhere. I'm especially amazed that God puts people with beautiful singing voices to worship him in every location, in every body of believers. He places people who can preach the word with power and authority and truth, even in small little churches in small rural Illinois. He does the same with the creative arts. It's almost like he knew we needed to make things. That's sarcasm. He did know we needed to create things. So one of the things I want to remember is I am determined to put time in my own schedule to be a maker. And I hope you do too. What would happen if we stopped saying we can't do whatever it is because we aren't good at it and we just had fun creatively? Like I said, I traveled with these women who are some of them professional artists. But in England, in our manor, which I'll tell you about in a second, we sat at the same table and I happily made my little kindergarten art next to these people who are doing master's level stuff. And we all had fun. Okay, number 5. I learned that the world is a big, big place. And God is doing things in every corner of it. Our first Sunday, we attended church at the Metropolitan Tabernacle in London. This congregation was started in 1650 and has been going strong ever since, with many notable pastors along the way, including Charles Spurgeon. We were greeted by the sweetest gentleman who was originally from Africa. He made us feel so welcome. He told us a little of the history of the church, and he suggested that we sit in the balcony so we could get a good feel for what was happening there. So we went upstairs to the balcony and we got there early. So as we were sitting there, the church began to fill, the balcony began to fill, and by the time the service began, every seat was full. And I was delighted to see people from every tongue, every tribe, every nation worshiping together. There were so many young people too, which was such an encouraging sight. So I learned that the church is alive and well. The world wants us to think otherwise, but my heart knows that my God can take care of his church. There was even a large contingent of deaf people, and I've been to other churches where there were deaf parishioners or congregants, but something different this time was the person who was doing the signing changed throughout the service, and the people who were deaf were also signing the worship songs. So it was so beautiful. I was hearing the organ, I was listening to the voices, and I was watching these people sign this beautiful worship music with their fingers. It was amazing. My heart just expanded seeing that. Number 6. One other thing that I learned is I'm a country girl for sure. I already knew this, but it was made evident again on this trip. London is a huge city. I believe we were told 13 million people. I love seeing all the iconic markers that let you know you're in London. The London Eye, the little black taxis, the double-decker buses, London Bridge, Big Ben, the phone booths. They were so adorable. And rain, we definitely experienced London thunder showers, and cool temperatures. Part of the time I had on a long sleeve shirt, my jean jacket, a sweater, and my raincoat. It was chilly there. I loved seeing the city, and I'm so glad I was there. But the places that really spoke to me, that stirred my heart, were the beautiful, beautiful countrysides. The people, this is just my opinion, but in my experience, the people that lived in the country were friendlier, they were more smiley, and they seemed as curious about us as we were about them. I loved my conversation in the pub where we had our second Sunday roast. I'll backtrack a second here. On Sundays, many of the restaurants changed their regular menu to what they call the Sunday roast. And it kind of reminded me of the big Sunday dinners that we used to have around my mom and my mother-in-law's and my grandma's tables on Sunday. And so people eat their big meal mainly in the middle of the day and then have snacky stuff at night. So we got to have 2 Sunday roasts. The first one was in a pub in London, which was lovely. And the second one was in a little pub in Pateley Bridge. And that's one I want to talk about. So there was a guy who was carving the pork, the beef, and the lamb. And when I went up to talk to him, I heard him say that he actually raises the sheep that they served at their Sunday roast. So I got to talking to him about being a farmer's wife. And so, of course, we bonded over that experience. But I totally cracked up when these exact words that Brad Scholl says, these words came out of this guy's mouth. He said, the equipment gets bigger, but the roads stay the same size. And I'm not kidding. That was hilarious to me because Brad says the same thing. Our farm equipment keeps getting bigger and bigger, but our little country roads and our little country bridges don't get bigger. So it gets to be kind of complicated. And the roads there were little itsy bitsy, like one lane, in my opinion, with these beautiful dry stone fences on either side. They're called dry stone fences because they don't use any mortar. The stones are stacked in such a way that the fences stay up. And it's a very special skill set, and there aren't a whole lot of people left, from what I understood, that can still do it. So I love that interaction. We had lovely conversation with Lisa, the owner of the manor, with Jane, who was a friend of Laura's, who actually lives in the little town where we stayed. all the shop owners, but especially we went into a lovely little bookshop in Grassington where lots of All Creatures Great and Small is filmed. Oh my gosh, don't you love that show? It's so good. And we had the sweetest visit with this little bookshop owner. And I wanted to buy everything and have scones and tea and exchange information and become lifelong friends with her. But I was doing carry-on only. So my space was very limited. So I didn't get to do all that. I did buy some things from her, but she was so precious. So here's what I learned. Man can build beautiful buildings, and oh my gosh, I saw some beautiful buildings. Man can design interesting spaces, and oh my gosh, I saw beautiful gardens. But nothing will outshine the natural beauty that only comes from the hand of God. Number 7, I learned about green tea and scones, or as Carol, who gave us our scone making lesson, taught us, it's actually scones, unless you're trying to be posh. And if you're trying to be posh, it's scones. But I'm used to saying scones, so I'm not trying to be posh, but I'm just going to say it the way I learned it. So I decided when I signed up for this trip that I was not going to deny myself a scone anytime it was offered. So I was surprised and a little bit disappointed when we arrived at our hotel and went for breakfast the very first day, and there were no scones. And then I learned that really scones aren't served. Now, I could be wrong. And if you're from England, please comment and tell me. But it seemed to me like that scones are mainly served at afternoon tea. So even though I didn't get scones my first morning, believe me, I ate my weight in scones while before that 2 weeks was over. We had a delightful cooking class in our manor by Carol. She was friends with Lisa, the keeper of the manor we stayed in, and she was so fun. She was just precious. We divided into groups of 2, and we made scones from Carol's recipe, which I should include that in the show notes too. So when we were done, I think we had 5 different kinds of scones to taste, plus the 6th one that Carol had made herself, plus everything else that she made for high tea. It was amazing. And do you know about clotted cream? So they serve their scones with a little container of clotted cream, which I should have looked up. It's cream. It's not real sweet. I'm not exactly sure how they make it, but I'm going to find out. And jam. And so not butter, but she uses clotted cream instead. So good. And I just want to give a shout out for anybody who is local to me. We used to have a little tea room in our town called Eva's Garden. And these ladies operated this tea room for years and years and years. And I have gone there for tea several times. Those girls were nailing it. They had it going on, and I personally just took it for granted. So I would love to have tea again at our little local Eva's Garden. So shout out to Eva and Geneva, who made that fantastic food. Okay, number 8, the gardens. We saw so many amazing gardens, and I'm so thankful for each one. Another representation of God's creativity joining with man's. My favorite, this is a hard choice, but my favorite was Chatsworth House. This was the house that they used to film Pride and Prejudice. So you can watch the newest version of that, and I was in that house. Crazy. The house was beautiful. The gardens were stunning. I had never seen such humongous rhubarb before. This place gave me all the feels because I love Jane Austen. I love Pride and Prejudice. I love Emma. I love Sense and Sensibilities. I love Persuasion. If you haven't watched those movies, I haven't read all the books, but I'm going to now. I just love them. They're so good, and I can watch them over and over and over and over again. There were two exhibits at Chatsworth House that I would fly over again today if you want to go to see them again. The first one was a clothing exhibit, and it was called Imaginary Conversations. So it was an Erdem, I may not be pronouncing that right, collection inspired by Duchess Deborah. So Duchess Deborah used to live in the house, and she was a fascinating person who I want to know more about. And she had a unique style. So they brought this fashion designer in to study her clothes, and then he created a new fashion line based on her. It was absolutely beautiful and inspiring, and I enjoyed it so much. And I would wear a lot of those clothes if I was smaller. And if I was a duchess who loved chickens and wanted to lead a quiet country life. So you can see Duchess Deborah and I had some things in common. We both loved the country life. The second exhibit that I loved was set up in a long hallway. And if I had not been listening to the guide on my earphones, I would have missed the whole thing because it just looked like little tan pieces of ceramic stuff stuck in a wall. But I learned that those handmade ceramic tiles were placed depicting the mitochondrial DNA of the Duke and Duchess and their son and daughter-in-law. For some reason, it just touched my heart so much. In every whip stitch, they'd have a little mirror. So you were looking at their DNA, but also at your face. And it just made me think, ultimately, we all go back to the people that God created. We're all related in this big world. We all got our DNA from Adam and Eve, and we're created by God. We're family. So how would things change if we treated everyone as our family? Number 9, Oxford. I want to tell you about the manor. So we stayed in a manor in Pateley Bridge. The manor was so beautiful. And when we looked outside our window, we had this beautiful view of the Yorkshire Dales with the little fences, with the sheep, with the cows, we could see the people walking on the pathways, and up at the top, the little cars going. It was like being in a fairy tale, and I absolutely loved it. One of the first mornings we had the windows open, and you could hear the sheep and the cows and the church bells. And it was like, oh my gosh, thank you, Father. I just love this. It was just amazing. I highly recommend get some friends and going to a manor at Pateley Bridge. Okay, number 9 is Oxford and C.S. Lewis. So I'm still processing all of that. Those of you who are in my Clean Heart Club Facebook group, which if you're not in there, you should join us, because I do a little guided meditation every week, and we're reading through the Bible together and pray for each other, and it's just a special group. So join me if you want to. And last summer, we did a study together of the Screw Tape Letters. So I love the Screw Tape Letters. I love The Great Divorce. I love, Mere Christianity. Those 3 books have impacted my faith journey so much. I first fell in love with C.S. Lewis. I wanted to be in love with him, but I had never even read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. There's something about me that does, I guess it's my rebellious nature. If someone suggests a book to me that I should read, I don't want to do it. And people had suggested that I read C.S. Lewis, and even though I knew I should, I resisted. But when I got my coach certification through Life Mentoring School, Dr. Edie, one of the requirements was to read The Great Divorce. So I'm also a rule follower. So I did it. I read the book. The first time I read it, I was like, I don't really get this. So I read it again, and now it makes more sense. And I've discussed it with people since then. So I fell in love with C.S. Lewis through The Great Divorce, which led me to Mere Christianity, which is such a wonderful book to read. If you're not good at justifying your faith, it's just so good. And then the Screw Tape Letters, that study last summer was just crazy. And all those videos actually are still in the Clean Heart Club Facebook group. And maybe we should do something else with them. Anyway, sidebar to myself. So we got to go to Oxford. We saw the place where Tolkien and Lewis and the Inklings would gather to discuss their work, to study. It was amazing. We saw the college where C.S. Lewis was a professor. We walked on Addison's Way, where he finally came to faith through the friendship of another believer, which is very touching to me, how God can use the testimony of people like you and people like me. Of course, he uses people like you, but he can even use people like me to have an impact on someone's faith. I loved it. And then we went to the Kilns, which was C.S. Lewis's home. That was so special to sit in his garden, to be in the house where he did his work that is still impacting other people. And number 10, the 10th thing that I learned from this trip to England was that travel changes us. I've been blessed to do a fair amount of traveling. Some of you have probably traveled a lot more than me, but I am so thankful for every place that I have been. Before I left, a dear friend sent me this quote, and I can testify that it's true. Travel makes one modest. You see what a tiny place you occupy in the world. And that's by Flaubert, I'm sorry, I don't know how to say his name, Flaubert. It's so true. The women I traveled with were so brave. They've gone, many of them have traveled lots and lots of places, and many times by themselves. They were such an inspiration to me, who's often a scaredy cat and who's stuck close to someone the entire trip. I love traveling, but one of the things that it always teaches me is that there is no place like home. This trip was 2 weeks. I learned that 2 weeks is too long for me to be away from Brad. I don't want to be away from him that long. We're going to be celebrating our 48th wedding anniversary, and I know we're so blessed to have made it to that. So I don't want to be away from him that long again by choice. But one thing I want to remember for sure, I want to live with wide-eyed wonder right where I am. If it's here on our farm, if it's in a faraway place, I want to live with wide-eyed wonder, to look for the beauty and the handiwork of God in each person, each place, and each thing. I want to try new experiences. I want to see the wonder in each of you. So friends, go on the trip, get outside your comfort zone. And I would love it if you would share with me anything that you have to share about England or Britain. I don't want to take my life for granted, and I bet you don't either. Okay, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you again soon. I have an amazing interview coming up next with one of my former students, and I cannot wait for you to see it. Love you. Oh, I'm going to pray. Let's bring our hands to prayer position. Let's take a big inhale, a nice slow exhale. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the world that you created, Father. You put beauty everywhere. Your handiwork is everywhere. Father, help us to open our eyes to see what you are doing in your story. Father, help us to be active participants in what you're doing. Father, I pray that you'll just show us what you're up to, what we're invited to, and help us to stop trying to drag you to our agenda and to join you in yours. The world you created is just amazing, and it speaks to me of your goodness and your grace. I pray your blessings on anybody who watches this, who listens to this, and I just thank you for all your good gifts. In Jesus' name, amen.